I'm muted. Tony, if you're there, we can start and Vera can introduce.
I am here.
Okay.
Great. So we're good to go now?
I think so. We're rolling.
Good. So this is a great pleasure to introduce our guest tonight. I am Vera Bühlmann, one of the members of the School for Materialist Research. And as is our custom, I start with very briefly a few words about the SMR before introducing Tony Yanick, our speaker for tonight. So the School of Materialist Research, SMR, is an education and research collective that offers intensive study courses, seminars, special programs, and research initiatives that address the materialisms running through contemporary science, philosophy, art, mathematics, design, architecture, and politics. SMR was founded by the Center for Philosophical Technologies at Arizona State University, the Institute of Social Sciences and Humanities, Skopje, the Department for Architecture Theory and Philosophy of Techniques at the Technical University in Vienna, that's where I'm from, and the Critical Inquiry Lab at the Design Academy Eindhoven, and it serves as a global hub for education, research, and experimentation at the intersection of the humanities, social sciences, creative fields, and the STEM sciences. Our talks are, the open seminar talks are live streamed on the SMR YouTube channel, and they will be accessible, visible to everybody also beyond the moment of this encounter now tonight. Yes, it is a great pleasure to have Tony Yanick here tonight with the title of his talk, The Limits of Control, Abductive Reasoning and Augmented Creative Intelligence. Tony Yanick is a member of the interdisciplinary group of Collective Intimacy. He's a PhD candidate researching generative and computational aesthetics, and he is one of the founding organizers of the new Center for Research and Practice and continues to host lectures on creative AI, as well as collaborations with Anne-Françoise Schmid at the interdisciplinary group of Collective Intimacy. He also, sometimes he says, is an artist. The title, as I said, Limits of Control, Abductive Reasoning and Augmented Creative Intelligence. And the motto he gave us with the abstract, I want to read this because I like it very much, by Richard Feynman. What I cannot create, I do not understand. Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for the great introduction and for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to just pull up really quickly before I'm going to share my screen so I can pull up I'll come back and forth between slides and video, I think. I'll also say that I am maybe sort of a veteran of these lectures things, so I'm very used to talking to the void. But those of you who are with me, don't take this sort of as a normal lecture where you want to space me out and let me talk forever. If there is a question or something that you'd like to have me reiterate or come in on, I prefer actually if you want to just come in and interrupt me, it would be fine. It does seem awkward at first, but it's okay with me. Okay, so my talk, of course, Limits of Control, talked about that. This is kind of like a little bit of an overview of what I'm trying to accomplish in my PhD work. I added this nice meme here, just showing the difference between like an aesthetic evaluation and how a machine sees an artwork, right? This is not a pipe, but it's 94% a pipe. So just a little bit of an introduction here. Machine learning, they've largely been studying basically how we can formalize this as how to induce a concept. So when they talk about, like, when you hear them talk about concepts, visual concepts, which I'll talk about later, they're talking about being able to, it's like a program or a set of rules, right? And they have a problem ahead of time. That's in order for them to validate and have evaluations in order to say whether or not an algorithm works or is good, right? But there's still a very, I mean, like these deep, and now I talked to, there's deep learning, right, which is kind of faddy now, but you know, you'll see a lot of these NFTs, if you've seen them online, being made by very much the same algorithms, and a lot of AI art, this whole new wave of AI art that's coming out. These come out of deep learning models, right? But they do some great abstract sort of visual concepts. They can even get close to doing representative concepts, but they still are very, very far away from being able to take an abstract high level concept like slavery. So what does it mean to say that the computational model has learned something or created something? That's like the essential problem here, right? And I sort of try to flip this, and it got cut off in this, I'm sorry, but I sort of flip this a little bit, and I'm looking at what does it mean when it has like a cultural value or aesthetic value? What kind of aesthetic what kind of aesthetic concepts are embedded in the training data set or embedded in the way that the models are being trained? Because any slight difference in these setups, right, will create different intelligence. And I think that being able to look into and understand this, the aesthetics, not just of modeling or of something, but actually what it knows or learns or what it can value, is a question I'm trying to figure out how to explore. So, I mean, when approached both from the artistic side and the engineering side, right, this is the common questions that you kind of can start to see, right? Like, what does the machine see when it's looking at at the depth and the breadth of your human experience? I kind of see this like if you've ever watched the last Angel of History, where the alien is coming the alien's coming back and kind of looking at the archive of this movement and looking at all this data to see what happens. We kind of have a similar aspect, and we kind of create these machines that, for instance, are trained on a museum's data set in order to statistically create relationships between artists at different periods. But that is not the only, although that's the task it learns. Because of these deep models, it actually has an access to what it learned. It learns like a general amount of information. So there actually are ways to probe it and kind of see different ways. So machine, in a way, sees much of and different ways of our experience. Again, imagination of a machine. And that when we try to when we try to train these, whether we're training them collectively or individually, like a bespoke model, right, we're embedded not only as our own implicit values and things and being embedded inside of the data set as it's being scraped, but also like, you know, the biases. There's a larger extent of like the biases and the amounts of information. And so, for instance, I'm going to talk about this model that OpenAI has called CLIP, which is contrastive learning in pre-training, I think, which is a model that is learning the relationship between text and an image. So it learns both ways of encoding an image through captions and going back, captioning images. And this is learned on very specific data sets. But like, I mean, very large amount of data sets, but the ones that they chose, like Reddit, ArtStation, certain ones, they make these models have different, I don't know, they're amplified. in certain ways, and I'll try to show that later on. And this is what I'm kind of I'm interested in. Everybody else is sort of interested when you talk about AI art, computational creativity. Can it move us aesthetically? Can it have? Is there some sort of empathy that can be transferred? When is it art? When is it? These sorts of questions. Sorry. And it's making, one thing that's great is it's making our ability to create like general. I'll show you later on as well when I try to give examples. That there's a great culture for people sharing with people who don't know how to program and making these things accessible. So the ability to kind of like push a button now to create these really amazing images is totally available, right? But they should be, maybe, or they have, in my opinion, there's an orientation we must take that there's these critical questions about a relationship with the technology should be sort of had. I mean, off the top of my head, I'm thinking about like, if I'm making these GAN model sort of artworks, the sort of energy use that I use for one GPU, for instance, like, is not embedded into the way that the process is made. There should be a critical position to like the sort of that kind of ethical damage, for instance. And how can it help us learn about our collective imagination? This is kind of a generic one, but we'll see here. And again, this is all right. So this is not like a very specific AI aesthetics. These are just some points I wanted to point out. Right. It's like, this is a super high level task considering in the engineering field, at least. We still have sort of a poor understanding of how these experiences gain an aesthetic value, like how these things adapt, because aesthetics is not like or any kind of aesthetic value is not static, right? It changes over time. And like, it might also illuminate these sort of models of culture that are increasingly influential and escapable. For instance, like when we're embedding the aesthetics of Reddit, that just means style. It's simply style. That's essentially what that means. Or on Instagram captions, right? And then the obvious, there's no good, or if we're trying to think of how we want to evaluate, right? Creative computational aesthetics is very good at objectifying these things and creating statistical measures for a cultural group of people selected who annotate images, right? And it can basically learn to mimic this. But this kind of quote implies that there's like some implicit aspect, right? This is kind of like an important, this is an important aspect or position for me to sort of think of, and I've kind of been alluding to it already. I also would reference like Benjamin Bratton, who always kind of ingrained this in me, but like the culture, the human level of AI, right? AI sees the human as like a level, which is like just the interface. So culture has been like reduced down to an interface with these machines. So I'm thinking about how we can, like how the interface kind of can be one of the aspects that we can prompt these questions of what a model can value. To be sort of realistic here, when your GPT-3, let me say, is a model made again by OpenAI, which also is clipped there, and it's a natural language model, which is probably one of the most impressive in our time. And you can talk to this AI basically with any given prompt, right? And it can respond in some almost valuable way. And the same way clip is built, you prompt clip with language, and it's built based on the GPT-3 message. So like, this is what I mean by at this time, like my interactive element is by using natural language prompt engineering in creative ways to pull out value in a model that I can immediately see if I'm working with vision, or I can build on a data set of questions and evaluate that way. So and so. But as much as we might want to think this always, and it's nice to kind of like purport it as like a artistic archetype, but we're not. It's not something unique. You're like a uniquely digital entity. It's not like they're very much tied to our, as in the designer, the way that we constrain or limit a program. Basically the way that I'm taking it in a common way here is like when you train these very large models with very general understanding, again, then the prompt engineering comes into play, because then you can you basically constrain your application. You constrain the way that the model can respond, and all of these things. It's always, and then at a larger scale, it's tied to the factors of human power in a larger value scale. So all these things, this discussion of cultural, societal, and ethical aspects, right, engaged in this production, need to be kind of talked about. And I think there are people who are doing this, don't get me wrong, but there's a large gap, and the way that the current wave of AI is going, the AI art is going, there's a very little engagement with theory. There's a huge theoretical gap with the practice, because it's so quickly used, and you don't have to really think about what you're doing, because you just push buttons and then it works. And there are trade-offs, obviously. But when we create the objects we're working with, like, how can we embed, what should we embed? But for one, how can we, right? It's kind of a normative question, but yeah, and then because each program in itself, in its own construct, right, is its own small universal system. Like, how can we expand that to work and contrast with different values, different cultural values? And can we even predict them for any kind of ethical outcomes, right? So a lot of what I'm discussing and these questions and these kind of setups is like a collaborative sort of relationship between the human and the machine, and I'm trying not to sort of like limit one or the other, and keeping so there is a high similarity, but we should know that similarity is a last layer on the vision, on the way we perceive, right? So the interface is created to sort of for our five senses. I mean, that's what a lot of like what the artist Faroki, sorry, I don't know if sorry, so these dogs are getting me. Okay, so if we're, what I'm trying to show, okay, sorry, I apologize for the distraction. But we should know that yeah, all the similarities we're making are kind of superficial, because the way the programs are made is that they've been built to sort of talk back to us. And the artist Faroki talks about it. The artist Faroki talks about it. he talks about it a lot, but let me go some, I'm sorry. So, okay, so this is Google Earth, and this is actual versions. This actually, you see this distortions here, right? That's when, because Google Earth is actually an image model of many images, right? So when these different perspectives become when they become rendered for our vision, they actually produce these sort of like weird roads, even though the data in the model is actually valid. We would see it flat if we went to, where it was. So, okay. So thinking about the co-creative aspect and what kind of potentials do we have, right? I think most the agency is creatively in concert with us. This is follows a lot of computational aesthetics or computational creativity positions, and so what we do is we contribute the sort of meaning to we contribute the meaning and we project our gaze, right? So this is what that aspect is. And I've gotten so, I need to take a breath quickly because of this dog situation that I can't control. Okay, I'm gonna skip because all right. So what I want to talk about is what is called the latent space, the sort of abstracted space that is used in the language of the generative models, and this is the space of where a lot of the expression and the expression occurs in the AI art. And what the latent space is it's a specialized space of all the learned positions that the model knows. So you can actually consider it as a sort of topological space that can be navigated. For instance, if you ever see the deep fake, quote unquote, deep fake sort of style or facial models, and then you see them sort of transforming into every possible model. You see different versions of it, and it seems like a seamless transition between different faces. That is simply, in a mathematical terms, that's just like a trajectory of vectors on the topological space that is the latent space. So this is like it's not a, I mean, this is like where we where the sort of manipulation and creativity can sort of happen. Of course, then there's a special knowledge and of knowing the actual program to be able to effectively use this. And so I think one thing is, although the latent spaces are reductive, they're the reduced space, they still are really inaccessible to us. And one of the things I would like to do or like to see is more choices, creative choices that allow people without specialized skills to be able to make meaningful discovery in this space, which is the space of all the space of possibility for the model that is trained, everything that it knows, which includes things that are not directly given to it. So in these deep models, these deep learning models, they're built by thousands, millions of neurons, right? And each neuron is a node in a network, and can be positioned on the latent space, right? And we can learn about them, by studying this model, right? And we can embed different what they call subgraphs or mini networks of nodes by choosing specific nodes, specific neurons in this model. And we can actually form ways of evaluating them. It's called latent embeddings. So what's very interesting about this is how, in an analogical way, how the model, it's computationally done and the computational techniques, but also in the semantic content of these models. You can actually find a direction on this latent direction, a set of vectors, which imposes a direction which would actually have a semantic value, which would be like thinking about no smile to smile, if you're thinking about a face that actually exists on a actual direction in the model. So you can think of it, you actually do move along the space, and that generates each point represents a new image, which will go from old to young, male to female. In some ways, it has some problems with gender, rightfully so. But so there are a few steps to these are like the general step, the 4 general steps with interfacing with the latent space. So if you train your model, you train your model. After training, I'm using here 512 dimensions because that's the dimensions of an image in a computer. So that's just the way that computer sees an image with a 512 by 512 image. So after training, you can have this latent space, which has these dimensions, and where each data point represents each image, right? And that they're spatially composed. It's one thing that that generative models do very well is that they're built in with a discriminator, and that is able to basically represent spatially or combine or cluster different features, similar features. So we can use this as a search for all the possibilities. But how do we enter the space, right? We can either these are 2 simple ways of doing it, right? One is through point generation, which is just randomly selecting anyone and kind of just generating images as they go, right? The other one's through some sort of image embedding. So this is where things get more interesting. Each model can embed a realistic image, an image of myself into the space and know where, for instance, my face would fit in a facial model. Third, navigating the space. So after we can generate or select the points, then we use them. Then the simple vector arithmetic happens, right? When you think about it semantically, that's where you can find a lot of cultural bias by just looking at 2 different points. I'll show you a little bit later when personalities related to faces, when you average the faces, they have very distinct biases in them. What an angry person is, what a artful person is. So if you can interpolate that. I think they found also that men and as a semantic value is closer to things like strength, blah, 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 the classic biases. They're heavily embedded in all of these models. So last is generation of artifacts. And you can, so what you can do is, or what I'm doing, you can take, you can specifically train a model to have a specific topology, to bend the data in a specific way to ask your question, right? So if I'm looking at aesthetics, I'm trying to feed it in a bunch of images and text sort of based in that history to see if it picks up the historical consequences, things like this. So I can actually freeze that space and use it as sort of like an elaborate, like an exploration, and just kind of like kind of go about doing working with it that way. And that's why obviously the new biases can get imposed, but it's aiming like in a design, looking at it as like a design way. If you're thinking about generation of artifacts, like rather than manipulating the actual mathematics to build something like a 3D object, the changes the way that you can interact with the tool. So you can manipulate it based on any like by priming it with a certain artist to kind of get a certain form of a line that you wanted, and things like that. So it kind of changes that way you can interact as well. So this just like brings me sort of to like my hopeful general introduction of things, so I can talk about the aesthetic value and thinking about the computational model for aesthetic value, which would be this is the, and I have one last part after this, which kind of considers the theory of abductive reasoning and in creativity. So how do, my goal of my task is to try to provide an understanding of how aesthetic features enter, how we construct, evaluate, and how other people receive the model. It's sort of general goal here. But how do you capture aesthetic value? I still don't. This is like not, I'm sure, an impossible question here. But if there is, let's hypothesize that there is some sort of intrinsic or non-instrumental value, right, that has value in and of itself. How then we assume that a general model captures it. So that's, I just want to take this naive assumption in order to sort of like explore, to try to find these things. The weaknesses are still there. They've been there since I think the beginning of computational aesthetics, but the reliability on ground truths, for instance, but even the problematic of ground truths, I think is a thing to be explored. That's of course thinking of how you condition your data set to something there has to be some evaluation of the model, I guess. So something that has to be able to go back to it as the truth. So what are those going to be? The capability of explanation. They can make judgments very easily. You can fake that by just feeding in it a bunch of different examples of judgments and asking it to kind of create something similar. It can do that very well, right? But how do we explain the judgments or explain the processes that happen in between? We still have no real way of doing that. I think we have some proposals recently, but that's still a huge problem. And of course, that leads to like the subjectivity and explainability of both 1 and 2. So what people have done, not a new idea here, but a very stable idea, is that there is a architecture which is analogous to the process that some psychological, visual, perceptual studies would say about early vision. So without knowing, without needing the tech, I'm trying to do this as little tech invested as possible, but I know, like, just to get to the actual conversations and the questions. There's also ones in the tech, but avoiding that. They do these, let's just assume that this is an architecture that's used, as I'm saying, and they are very successful at rating art, rating good photographs, but they're not really used to be about aesthetic perception and evaluation, which is what I would like to look at using them for. So, should I show, let me really quickly switch to something, hold on. So where is it when I don't have apologies, new share. Okay, so this is one study done where they were looking at every single feature in the model, and seeing what kind of value it pertained to. So you can see in this is what the convolutional neural networks are doing, is that they learn these very low level features based on filters. So they're curves, color, and things like this. So that's like the early visual curves here. This is actually a visualization of all of the this is a visualization of a neuron. One neuron is each box, and the way that the curves that you see the image made is because they basically put through the model a bunch of different curves, and you see that this is a sort of average of what it expects a curve to look like. So if it sees a curve, that box would activate in the model, right? So finding the activation shows what each neuron sort of looks like, right? I'll switch that back over now. So the question is it reasonable to exploit such models to gain better insight into the universal processes that drive us? Can we even expect that these general things that we might just even be making analogous reference to are going to do us anything, right? So if it's that means that we need to know of ways of interacting with it that we can understand. And that terminology here comes to being known in engineering terms as explainability, or XAI is another field, is what it's called. And so we know that this is super challenging because of the depth, but we can use this latent space sort of this latent space exploration, and looking at each point on latent space in the visualization I showed just recently, we can sort of gain some insight into it. So this is just an example. So some people have tried to have done so far, right? They've analyzed predictions. They've tried, so that's basically trying to predict the predictions, and then the others are trying to provide verbal justifications, some sort of qualitative relationship. There are, I think, at least 40 versions of data sets I've found so far that have been specifically collected for some sort of aesthetic evaluation, right? And others are leveraging the concept of adversarial examples. So what is, if you've heard of the GAN, Generative Adversarial Network, that includes this. This is a sort of like huge leap in machine learning, because they had found a new way to train models. But they also found that these sort of adversarial examples, they come from the fact that vision is so easy to trick. Like that's what you can have, these imperceptible sort of changes in an image, and it will go from predicting a cat to a panda, or these things. You could actually then, what they found was then you could actually engineer these kind of adversarial objects, so you could actually get it to predict the wrong thing, right? So this is a security issue, but also at the same time, they used it to train these models, right? So the thing to take into account, right, is that these aesthetics are going to be probably even more prone to, because they're even more abstract, they're more prone to adversarial attacks, or even to, sorry. So really, this is maybe anecdotal, but I think can be backed by a lot of people's experiences so far. Like, it's by doing this countless times, building the models, changing them, seeing what happens, sitting there for hours, waiting for it to generate, like, that happens. They call this like a data intuition. Like you just kind of some people brute force their way in, other people have different intuitions, but there is something there, that there's something that's right now we're not able to like publish, can't publish this sorts of things. I think you can publish in experiential ways, but there's no process of this sort of reasoning, or how this sort of occurs, or what can be better about it. And I think that's where we can bring in this idea of abduction, and talk about, rather than data intuition, which I think data intuition still relies on an intense understanding of like what is in the data, and what, like, a lot of the mathematics. There is something, even I think abduction can explain it better. So first expounded by Charles Peirce, right? It's a creative form of hypothetical reasoning, which allows us to expand where we are. And he describes this a lot in senses of orientation. When you're in a city and you're lost and you just kind of feel a way, I think you just kind of feel the way of going right, and it ends up being in retrospect, the correct direction. This is sort of being abducted by the architecture of the city, of the city itself. The power of it is that you have these manipulative conditions, right? And we have it's something that's an encounter, like it's something that's neither material nor quite you're encountering the material aspect, sorry, but it's not quite speculative nor empirical. This is what I mean by it's really difficult to kind of publish or discuss or talk about. Except for this man, I think does a very good job. Lorenzo Mainani is an Italian philosopher, cognitive scientist, who is studying abduction in great depths, publishes a lot on it. And so I just wanted to kind of have these, he says it better than I can, so I'm just going to quote him on 2 quotes, just to kind of discuss what this version, a specific type of abduction he's describing here, which is manipulative abduction. So especially in concrete manipulations of the external world constitute a fundamental passage in the sciences. By a process of manipulative abduction, it's possible to build prosthesis, right, epistemic mediators for human minds by interacting with external objects and its representation in a constructive way. In this matter, it is possible to create implicit knowledge through doing, and to produce very kinds of opportunities to find, for example, anomalies, fruitful, new, risky perspectives. This kind of embodied and unexpressed knowledge holds a key role to the subsequent processes of scientific comprehension and discovery. And one last one is, the whole activity of manipulation is devoted to building various external epistemic mediators that function as an enormous new source of information and knowledge. Therefore, manipulative abduction represents a kind of redistribution of the epistemic and cognitive effort to manage objects and information that can not be immediately represented or found internally. For example, exploiting the resources of visual imagery. It is difficult to preserve precise spatial and geometrical relationships using mental imagery in many situations, especially when one set of them has to be moved relative to the other, right? So in using in this way, there are models, there are the formations of the stars, there are things that we can use that are external to our mind, right? That act as a manipulator, as like access to the manipulation of our epistemic or categorical knowledge forms. They have these major features. So one, it can elaborate a simplification of the reasoning task, right? They can, when we need to manipulate concrete things in order to understand structures which are otherwise too abstract, or they're redundant or unmanageable. He also says that of incomplete or inconsistent information is used to get more data and improve knowledge. It enables us to build external artifactual models, and that they can adapt the environment to our needs. This is one thing we do. We do this also as a control of data, and we can exploit these sort of various types of prostheses. So with that in mind, what I'm trying to do is look more into the ideas of the abductive or the abductive manipulation, right? To see how they learn, what aesthetic cultural values could they obtain or invent. And the answer is, in an odd way, the way that I've been trying to describe it with this latent space, right, is to find a way to recognize the shape and how to manipulate the shape of latent space in order to sort of quote unquote reprogram it, to find ways to, if you can find bias, how to sort of reprogram the space without retraining. And this is a theoretical sort of model, or the theoretical sort of position I'm trying to take with these, to explore aesthetics through an abductive manipulation of deep learning models. So very quickly, just to show a very simple example of one of the larger studies I'm trying to do, is to think about evaluation from the terms of an art critic. So I've trained model on, I think, over 200 different personalities based on previous data sets. And these personalities are trained to basically describe the image that it is in front of it, without the aesthetic, giving it no like art critic form. It's just looking at the image and basically talking about the image. So a very abstract image here, which very little meaning to me, right? This came out of a random generation of latent space of one of my models. And I fed this into all of the personalities. abrasive. Here's a visual representation of one of the most used, most trained right now face models that they use for deepfakes. And then it's averaged over, I think, 5,000 different generations to give you an average version of what it thinks that what an abrasive person is. And you see here, here's some of the things that this one comes up with, right? Well, they get that something about a hamburger Meister is big. A questioning about what kind of image it is. It recognizes it's a digital image or a 3D image. So this is just like the different example, or a barbaric person, for instance, recognizes for some reason, again, Burgermeister, right? But I don't know why they're talking about a form of commentary, nothing but a form of entertainment, digital image. So stupid, again, they recognize the object. Also the idea of the artwork. Questioning person. So this is just like four examples of these sort of personalities. So what I've been doing is sort of generating these sorts of images to find the relationship between positions given an image, and then once I know that, I try to use these spatial positions to sort of influence my model to sort of adapt its position of its visual form. And so, I mean, what is to be abducted is in the process of sort of like generating these sorts of experiments, I guess. I have other ones to show, but I'm at 1 hour. I would like to open it up because it's 1 hour of like pure silence on my, other than dogs barking, is like really difficult. So is okay to go to a discussion or some questions?
Great, thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Yes. Maybe you can stop the screen sharing for a moment, so we can see.
Yeah. Hi.
Great. So thanks a lot for your presentation.
Thank you.
The limits of control.
Mm-hmm.
There. We do have time for questions and comments and observations or curiosities.
We have somebody with their hand raised. Do you want to just ask?
Katie Chukrov, yes, please.
My screen doesn't work somehow. Do you hear me?
I do.
Yes, we hear you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably I put the wrong button without video screen. But anyway, thank you for the lecture. I was a little bit late, 20 or 25 minutes late. My question is quite general. Why would we need aesthetics? Why would we need the dimension of aesthetics to somehow explain all those things in digital generative potentialities on the one hand, and on the other hand, if aesthetics is inevitable, then can this aesthetics be considered to be artistic? Because I mean, what you were describing based on perception, on some kind of phenomenological transcendental issues, and indeed digital design and digitality brings us back to perceptive Kantian aesthetics, but to what extent it is the zone of art which bid farewell to aesthetics long ago?
This is why in my this is why in my bio I said sometimes an artist, because this is where I've sort of maybe lapsed. Let me just say that I'll try to answer better, but when I'm trying to say art, like the art, I'm looking at it from a disciplinary point of view. Like I'm looking at it from the computational creativity sort of what they're kind of looking at as what art is. Although I think like there is a role for artists and arts in this situation is this sort of experimental probing of its expressive qualities. I don't know, like not aesthetics proper, but yes. So like but let's talk about the first question. In your first question, you asked me, in general, why is aesthetics necessary here or a necessity? I wouldn't say that it's I wouldn't say it's the only way that you can do something that would get to something similar about these models. I think it is an interesting way, which is what I'm proposing, is that there, and also I see that there is a danger with, there's a danger with approaching these things, these objects as aesthetic objects. But what I worry about is that the models that are being used to make these artworks are kind of like the secondary expression. Their models themselves are being like embedded in society and used for, you know, language processing tasks, like very redundant, like very simple. They're being embedded widely in our culture, and if we don't really understand how it values that, like I think I think there's a relationship here between the aesthetic value and the ethics, the way of approaching ethically the model, or approaching the ethics of, or a model having any sort of ability to create ethics in that way without normative function. But I wouldn't say that it's like that it is the only or is the best solution, if that's a response like this. Does that answer you a little bit or no?
I think you did answer. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think what is interesting in this is that there is in your vector or interest in aesthetics, there's a kind of a bringing aesthetics very close to ethics.
Yes.
In a framework of an epistemological way to work with these computer powers.
Right, and I think it's also trying to see these models as like they're partial models, but so they're not trying to explain all of intelligence, for instance, but they have access to something that's always that we might be overlooking if we continue this like fast process of what makes the coolest looking image, for instance. Like just the current art the current AI art that I've been looking at is only like a year old. The model came out in January, and they found a way to use it for to produce like expressive images, like I think 4 months later. So it's very new, but the way that I see that the styles and the forms are being sort of quickly embedded is weird. It makes it a very short-term movement.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of like explodes in, gets as much as it can, and then some new little change, some new little quirk happens, and everybody moves to that, right? And there's no really, I don't know, other than this process, like working with the model yourself. Yeah, there's no like longer term thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it seems like sometimes these things are also sped up so you can have your Twitter post of like that you made the slight change. But I just think that there's a large gap right now with the theory. I mean, with the theory aspect. Like an anecdote would be that there's a large group of collective coders who probably are on the top, like on the edge of this scene, like creating like they create a lot of the stable code that's used right now for this stuff. That you'll see it with all, like there's a whole genre of NFTs coming out, and just but like this group has a folder in their repository for theory and it's empty. I mean, that's just an anecdote, but I mean, like that's real. I mean, like, and I don't know if it's necessary. Like, there's a critique available to that too. Like, do you need to have a theoretical one when you can just go right in and start kind of manipulating it? And that's why I was.
One of the strong points, no? So there is an explicit affirmation that this kind of computation does away with the need or even the promise of theory. So there's I think a very fundamental thing going on in this interrelation.
Yeah, and I think that's why I've moved to abduction, just sort of like pre-inductive, deductive logic of how to approach it. But then I fall short on how to. This is me still being a young scholar, I guess, but I fail in how to write about that process without just wanting to talk about, does that make sense? It's easy to talk about it in an artistic, expressive way, but to write it for like an article in engineering journals, at a lapse of where it goes without being just but I'm even stuttering to find the answer there. But anyways, I tried to propose like these are just real questions that I'm sort of exploring.
I mean, there is an aspect about this abduction where it comes from, which has a lot to do with new materialist interests. No, and for Peirce, for him it was metaphysics, and he had this interest in a topological logic had a lot to do with a very strong postulate to say that mind is very slow matter and matter is very fast mind. No? So there's a kind of a spectrum that he had opened up, which I have always been very fascinated by, because it so speaks to this electric kind of real-time instantaneity and coexistence and logistics.
Yeah, I mean, and very much a spatial construct. I mean, it's very spatially represented. The diagram is an abductive logic. I mean, the diagram abducts you when you're in certain ways. So like, that's why I think it's also very useful for this navigation of the latent space, which is an abstracted sort of conceptual space of a model that you have to actually navigate with. There are nonlinear dynamics, but let's just assume it's a flat, like an easy topology of a 2D space. And you just kind of walk around. That shows you the evolution of a concept in a model. There's that. I don't know. There's that. That's abduction is like is the process to explain how to kind of develop new understanding of what the latent space contains, I guess.
Yeah. More comments or questions?
Or yeah.
Yeah, I guess I can. I don't know if this is quite on topic, but I know the last time we met, you were showing me different I don't know what you'd call them, but essentially computer models that were producing something like Russian surrealist literature.
Yeah, GPT.
Yeah. So I'm sort of wondering where this fit in, and maybe even something like how does this fit in not social programming, but is it sort of developing to the point such that something like Facebook or something of this matter could rely simply on a sort of machine-produced language of this sort in order to be convincing or to manipulate or even whatever abduce from what would be considered something digestible or influential or
It's
so on.
already being used. I'm not sure where.
Yeah.
I could not point exactly to, but machine text is definitely out there. The thing, I think this is like what you're asking is like the essential question that Turing asked as well. Like it was just like, because the whole thing about the Turing test is it's not about like there's like it's just a subjective evaluation of, well, that's close enough. That's a human. And that's the same exact thing that they're doing here with GPT-3, which is essentially like I'm gonna talk to it, and regardless of the fact that technologically it knows like these different prompts prompt it to go different ways because it uses, but like that's exactly how they've been used. Like they're evaluated based on this subjective, is it human, with some metrics. And so I think that's already available and it's already there. It's definitely 100% there with like interactive gaming and fiction. I know of journalists who have asked me to actually invent these things because they wanted to start employing it in their news. So I mean, it's Netflix uses these models in a way, not the language way, but they kind of they build categories of everything, of like infinite categories that like pertain personally to you, right? So this is like, I mean, we're interacting with these things all the time. It's like whether or not we get used to interacting with them at like this semantic level. That's what GPT-3 and CLIP and these multimodal models are really getting to, and they're about a year old, and I think they have a really big impact on what's going on. So
okay.
I think it won't be. I think at first you might start seeing them as novelty, like as like an announced. That's already happening. Novels and things, but announced journalists. I know of. There's a digital avatar in China, right? That's a journalist, or that's a news anchor. But yeah. So I think it's like a general collective perception on whether it's human enough, I guess. Which. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I guess sort of that goes along with that. Where does if we can get that close, or whatever what we could call close or approximate to something of that sort, where does the sort of subversion of art re-enter if the lines get blurred to the point of like if we can't tell whether images or can't tell, I'm not speaking properly, but if the distinctions get blurred enough, is there still sort of revolutionary and subversive power in art, or is it also somehow present in computer generated?
At some point then, like, I don't know, if you're this like very doomsday this scenario, I'm just going to take it as like a truth to be able to answer this. So let's assume that.
It was very speculative. I wasn't saying it's
no. But like then it becomes very like there's a new technology, and art and technological mediums won't be so kitsch or weird. They'll be just natural as paint in a canvas. I mean, because there'll be different. There'll be different. There's also the expansion of the perception of reality, or with the like blurring, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Yep.
Good. Yeah, it's a fascinating world you move in, and a worrying one. Thanks a lot for giving us some insights.
Thank you for letting me talk, and I appreciate the everybody here. Thank you, and welcome to contact me if you have if you want to talk about anything about the project or the thoughts or critiques. If you want to just do that, that's fine.
Great. Thanks a lot. It was nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a nice evening, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Or good morning or good afternoon, wherever you might be.
Bye.